Are you looking for a cool oasis just outside the desert?
You know, I ask people that all the time. I was
Always.
just thinking, where can I find a cool oasis just outside the desert?
Hidden beneath this barren Arizona wasteland are the ancient remains of the most sophisticated water harvesting system ever developed in the American Southwest. Here, where exposed bedrock and eroded creek beds stretch for miles, indigenous peoples once created flowing streams, fertile grasslands, and abundant wildlife using nothing but carefully placed rocks and an understanding of how water wants to move across the land.
Less summer crops, more efficient in our methods of applying water, more efficient in delivering water through our canal system.
These desert valleys alone sustained thousands of people for over 1,000 years without a single pump, pipe, or modern irrigation system. The Hohokam people built over 1,000 miles of canals that are still visible today. The Zuni created intricate waffle gardens that captured every precious drop of rain. But this brilliant system nearly disappeared after European colonization. And now, Arizona is facing its worst water crisis in history. The state is currently experiencing the worst drought in over 1,200 years.
This is a desert, we don't get rainfall, but we need the Colorado River to grow.
The Colorado River, which supplies water to 40 million people across 7 states, has dropped to its lowest level since Lake Mead was first filled. The reservoir is now at just 27% capacity, and water managers are implementing unprecedented restrictions.
And I'm very, very cautious about the water in my apartment.
Farmers are being forced to abandon their fields, cities are implementing strict water restrictions, and scientists warn that this represents the new normal for the American Southwest. But while politicians debate water rights and engineers propose billion-dollar desalination plants, there exists an ancient method that could completely change this reality.
Residents say that over the last several weeks, something has changed.
A method so simple, it seems impossible, but so powerful, it can transform completely dead land into oases that flow year-round. And in 1982, 2 Arizona ranchers accidentally rediscovered this ancestral secret that had been hiding in plain sight for centuries. Stay until the end because today, you're going to discover how a 1,000-year-old technique is turning Arizona's most worthless lands into water-rich oases, and why this could be the key to solving the entire American Southwest's water crisis. Welcome to Forgotten Lands.
I love this place so much. It's so vibrant and has so much vitality.
When Joe and Valor Austin bought 2,000 acres in the Chiricahua Mountains of southeastern Arizona, they were looking at what appeared to be some of the most worthless land in the state. The property sat at 6,000 feet elevation, surrounded by oak, juniper, and pinyon pines. But the grasslands themselves were a patchwork of destruction. Bare bedrock dominated the landscape like exposed bones. Creek beds had been eroded down to solid rock, carved so deep they looked like scars across the land. Water flowed only during the brief rainy season, and even then, it rushed away so quickly it provided no benefit to the land. The previous decades of overgrazing had stripped away the protective grass cover, leaving the soil vulnerable to every storm. Without vegetation to slow the water, each rainfall became a destructive force, carving deeper gullies and washing away what little topsoil remained. The land had entered what scientists call a degradation spiral, a vicious cycle where each storm made conditions worse. When they first surveyed their new ranch, they wondered, what do the cattle eat? The Austins had purchased this land not because they thought it was valuable, but because it was all they could afford. They were young ranchers with limited capital, and this degraded property represented their only chance to own land and pursue their dream of ranching. But the Austins noticed something that would change everything. Right where their driveway crossed a small waterway, they decided to build a simple check dam using materials they had on hand: rocks, old concrete footing, and broken bricks. They laid these materials perpendicular to the slope, creating a small barrier that would slow down the water flow. It was a modest experiment, born more out of necessity than grand vision. They just wanted to stop their driveway from washing out every time it rained. What happened next seemed almost magical. Within the first year, soil began to accumulate behind the check dam. The road stopped washing out completely. And most remarkably, a seep formed downslope that lingered long after the rains had stopped, supporting a lush growth of grass where none had grown in decades. The contrast was striking. On one side of the check dam, the same barren landscape they'd inherited, but on the other side, green grass and moist soil that persisted through the dry season. This single observation changed their entire approach to land management. They began to see water not as something that needed to be controlled or channeled away, but as a resource that could be captured and held on the landscape. If this one check dam can do this much here where it's relatively dry, they thought, what could hundreds of them do where more water flows? And that question launched one of the most ambitious land restoration projects in Arizona history. Over the next 10 years, the Austins would build more than 20,000 loose rock check dams across their 2,000 deeded acres, plus thousands more on the 14,000 acres they leased, unknowingly recreating the same water harvesting techniques that indigenous peoples had used for centuries. The work was backbreaking and required incredible persistence. Every rock had to be carried by hand and carefully positioned. They built check dams in the main drainages, in minor waterways, across slopes, and in every depression where water might flow. Some dams were small, just a few rocks high. Others were substantial structures that could hold back significant amounts of water and sediment. But each one was designed with the same principle in mind. Slow the water down and give it time to soak into the land. The Austins developed their own techniques through trial and error. They learned that the dams needed to be porous enough to allow water to flow through slowly, but solid enough to withstand flash floods. They discovered that the key was not to stop the water completely, but to slow it down just enough to allow infiltration and sediment deposition. The transformation that followed defied everything experts thought they knew about desert restoration. The 180-acre bedrock watershed, which used to flow water for only 1 month of the year, began flowing for 34 months straight by the time researchers first studied it in 2004. The 2,000-acre Turkey Pen watershed, which previously flowed for just 3 months annually, developed permanent pools of water and year-round flow. The soil chemistry began to change as organic matter accumulated behind the dams. Microbial communities that had been dormant or absent began to flourish in the newly moist conditions, creating an upward spiral of improvement that continued year after year. If you're amazed by this transformation so far, comment OASIS below and let me know what you think could happen next. As the check dams accumulated soil and slowed water flow, they began reconnecting the creek flow with the much wider floodplains. For decades, the eroded creek beds had been like pipes, carrying water quickly away from the land without allowing it to spread out and infiltrate. The check dams changed this dynamic completely. Water that had been rushing away as destructive runoff was now spreading out across the landscape, infiltrating into the soil, and being slowly released over weeks and months. This created what ecologists call a positive feedback loop, a system that builds on itself and becomes stronger over time. More water infiltration led to more vegetation growth. More vegetation led to better soil structure and increased water holding capacity. Better soil held more water, which supported even more vegetation. The vegetation changes were dramatic and happened faster than anyone expected. Native grasses that hadn't been seen on the property for decades began to reappear. Wildflowers bloomed in areas that had been barren rock just years before. The science behind this transformation reveals why these ancient techniques are so powerful. When you slow down water flow with strategically placed check dams, several critical processes happen simultaneously. First, the water has more time to infiltrate into the soil instead of rushing away as runoff. Studies show that slowing water flow can increase infiltration rates by 300% or more. Second, sediment that would normally be carried away settles out behind the dams, gradually building up soil depth and fertility. Third, the slower water flow dramatically reduces erosion. And fourth, the accumulated water is slowly released, subsurface over weeks and months, extending the growing season. The hydrological changes were measurable and significant. Stream flow duration increased dramatically across all watersheds on the property. Groundwater levels rose as more water infiltrated into the soil. Springs that had been dry for years began to flow again. The sediment accumulated behind each check dam wasn't just dirt. It was fertile soil rich in organic matter and nutrients that had been stripped from the landscape upstream. As this soil built up, it created perfect growing conditions for native plants. Seeds that had been dormant in the soil for years suddenly had the moisture and nutrients they needed to germinate. By 2022, 40 years after the Austins first bought their worthless land, the transformation was complete and undeniable. Water was flowing and seeping in and around most of the washes throughout the property. Some streams now flowed year-round where they had been dry for decades. Once bare bedrock was blanketed with a thick, spongy carpet of fertile soil and grass. The contrast with neighboring properties was stark. While surrounding ranches still struggled with erosion and water scarcity, the Austin Ranch had become an oasis of green in the desert. Wildlife returned in abundance. Water bugs, fish, ducks, and turtles had returned to the streams. Cottonwood and willow trees were growing where previously there had been nothing but rock and dust. Deer, elk, and other wildlife were so abundant that local hunters complained that all the animals seemed to live on the Austin Ranch. bird species that hadn't been seen in the area for decades began to return. The ranch had become a functioning ecosystem again, with complex food webs and natural cycles that had been absent for generations. But here's what makes this story truly extraordinary. The Austins weren't inventing something new. They were rediscovering techniques that had been perfected over centuries by the indigenous peoples of the Southwest. Archaeological evidence shows that these water harvesting methods were used throughout the region for over 1,000 years before European colonization disrupted these systems. The Zuni people in New Mexico had used similar water harvesting methods to create waffle gardens, carefully constructed sunken beds that captured and held precious rainwater for growing crops in the desert. The Hopi had developed sophisticated dry farming techniques that worked with natural water flows rather than against them. And the Hohokam people, who lived in what is now Arizona from before the time of Christ until around 1450 AD, had created one of the most advanced irrigation systems in North America. Their canal network covered over 1,000 miles and supported a population of tens of thousands in what is now the Phoenix metropolitan area. If this story is inspiring you to think differently about what's possible in desert landscapes, hit that like button and subscribe to Forgotten Lands for more stories of ancient wisdom solving modern problems. These ancient water harvesting techniques were based on a profound understanding that modern agriculture has largely forgotten. Instead of fighting the desert, work with it. Instead of trying to bring water to the land through expensive infrastructure, create conditions that allow the land to capture and hold the water that's already there. The Austins' 20,000 check dams were essentially a modern rediscovery of this ancient wisdom, proving that techniques developed centuries ago could solve today's most pressing water challenges. The implications of what happened at the Austin Ranch extend far beyond their own property boundaries. With Arizona facing this unprecedented water crisis, scattered across the state are millions of acres of degraded rangelands and abandoned farmlands that could potentially be restored using these same ancient techniques. The beauty of the check dam approach is its remarkable simplicity and scalability. It doesn't require expensive equipment, specialized materials, or complex government permits. It can be implemented by individual landowners using local materials and basic hand tools. What's more, these systems actually improve with time, rather than degrading like most human-made infrastructure. Each year, they capture more sediment, hold more water, and support more vegetation. They're not just sustainable, they're regenerative, actively healing the landscape while providing tangible economic benefits to landowners. The Austins discovered that their restored grasslands could support more cattle on less land, reducing their operating costs while dramatically improving their environmental impact. The economic benefits extended beyond just cattle ranching. The improved wildlife habitat created opportunities for hunting leases and ecotourism. The enhanced water security increased the property value significantly. The Austin Ranch became a model of how ecological restoration could be economically profitable. The potential for scaling this approach across the American Southwest is truly enormous. If just a fraction of the region's degraded rangelands were restored using these ancient techniques, it could significantly increase water security, food production capacity, and wildlife habitat across multiple states. It could provide a proven model for other arid regions around the world facing similar challenges. As Valor Austin explains, set up the right conditions, and both the plants and the soil will volunteer. This simple statement captures the essence of what makes these ancient techniques so powerful and relevant today. Rather than forcing the land to produce through intensive inputs and constant intervention, they create conditions that allow natural processes to restore themselves. The land wants to heal and become productive. It just needs the right conditions to do so. Today, as the American West faces an increasingly uncertain water future, the story of the Austin Ranch offers more than just hope. It offers a proven blueprint for transformation that has been tested over 40 years. It shows that even the most severely degraded landscapes can be brought back to life using techniques that are thousands of years old. It proves that ancient wisdom can solve modern problems more effectively than expensive technological solutions. The question isn't whether these techniques work. The Austin Ranch stands as living proof that they do. The question is whether we'll have the wisdom to learn from both ancient knowledge and modern examples, and the courage to implement these solutions at scale before it's too late. Because hidden beneath every piece of degraded wasteland in the American Southwest are the ancient remains of a water-rich oasis, waiting to be rediscovered and brought back to life.